It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Hello, this is Dr. Justin Coulson. I'm here with my wife and mum to our 6 children, Mrs. Happy Families, Kylie Coulson. There's a favourite podcast that I have. I've got a long list of podcasts that I love, but one of those podcasts is by an author and a psychologist that I really look up to and love learning from. His name is Adam Grant. A couple of years ago, he wrote a book called Think Again. And his podcast is called Rethinking. It's about analysing what's working and what's not in our lives and looking at psychological science and evidence to help us to be better. When he has his guests on his podcast, he does this thing called a lightning round. And the first question that he always asks in the lightning round is, what's the worst piece of advice you've ever been given? Today on the Happy Families podcast, we asked you, what is the worst parenting advice that you have ever been given? And I think the easiest way to say this is that some people say really dumb things with the very best of intentions. All of the advice that people have been given is well-intentioned advice. But at Happy Families, we want your family to be happy. So, with the overwhelming number of responses that you gave, I mean, we had something like 700, 800 comments come through. It was overwhelming. Nobody's going to read all of those on Facebook. So we've consolidated them down into groups and lumps of areas. And today in the podcast, we're going to share the worst parenting advice on the planet so that you don't succumb. And if you've been doing any of these things, we will gently encourage you to stop now, please.
Do you remember anyone giving us really bad parenting advice?
Yeah, but the advice that I'm going to say was the worst advice ever is really provocative, and I know that some people are going to hate me for saying it. When we had our first daughter, we actually got a lot of advice around cry it out sort of stuff. Our poor baby girl, she had terrible reflux. I mean, we almost didn't sleep for 6 or 9 months when she was born. It was just terrible. But we also received advice, don't vaccinate your child. Vaccination causes autism, vaccination does this, vaccination does that. And for a little while there, we seriously considered not vaccinating. Now, I've got some significant reservations about what happened with the mRNA vaccines with COVID. And when we have a look at what's going there, that's a different story. But here's what we know about kids and vaccines. The world is healthier than it's ever been, and our kids are safer than they've ever been. And I'm fully pro-vaccination now. But we really went through the ringer on that. I think it was terrible advice, and I'm so glad that we made the decision to vaccinate our kids. Can you think of any bad advice that we received?
I wish that I had written down all of that bad advice.
We definitely copped it over the years.
We definitely have.
Especially when people found out that I was going to become like a parenting expert, right? Oh, yeah, you need to make sure you tell people this.
But I remember a handful. One of them was specifically around the fact that we shouldn't be picking up our kids every time they cry because they'll start to control us.
Yeah.
That we need to actually show our baby who's boss and make sure that we're in control, not them. And those kinds of things, they're the ones that really stand out to me the most because they were so counter to what I believed in my heart.
Well, let's dive into the responses that we had from parents on our Facebook page when we said, tell us the dumbest stuff that you've ever been told about raising kids. Like, what is the worst parenting advice you've ever received? Brooke Marie.
This one blows my mind.
Advice from a photographer. Brooke said that the photographer told her, to make my baby sleep, I should give him pain stop medication for 3 days in a row. No words.
I do remember having a conversation with my doctor when we had little kids who actually said that he would give his kids when they did long flights.
Phenergan.
Yes.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Not recommending that here at all. Really bad idea. Please don't. Lucky McClucky said that the worst parenting advice received was lock them in a shed for the night for controlled crying.
Oh.
It's heartbreaking. But what I hate about this is that there are people who are walking the planet right this very minute, are walking in our neighborhoods right this very minute, who actually think this is good advice. I loved Amanda Bombardier's response when she was told to let her newborn cry herself to sleep. She said this, I wouldn't leave that now 17-year-old to cry alone. So why on earth do people think it's okay to leave a tiny baby?
The logic, it's so logical to me when you read something like that.
Chills.
It makes sense. And yet we have this mindset that we need to show our babies who's boss.
Then there was the advice that I'm going to say actually hurt to read. It was simply awful counsel. Things like insisting that parents are always in control, always having to be right, always having power over their children, using that natural position of power to force an issue through a show of might and strength. Check out this one from Rachel Crane in Orange.
She said the best way to deal with your strong-willed child was to push back with a tougher and stronger will until she submitted.
So this archaic idea...
This feels like we're breaking in a horse.
Exactly. In fact, there was an anonymous person, didn't want to be named, from Sydney, who was given the advice, it's your job as the parent to hurt your child and to break their will. And this is actually where I was when we first started this whole parenting journey. If we go back to 2001, 2002, we've got a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, and I truly believe that as the father of a little girl who had a very strong will, it was my job to bend her will until it met with mine. And it was a disaster. It was the worst thing ever. And our family was fracturing and falling apart. Our daughter it was only getting worse. It was not getting better.
Yeah.
And it's why I quit my radio career and spent the next 20 years of my life, or more now, like 25 years of my life, researching this stuff, because it's just plain bad advice. Amanda Van Staten on the Sunshine Coast said,
to never apologise to children as it shows weakness. And we wonder why our kids struggle to apologise and seek forgiveness.
There's nothing better when you're a kid than having a parent look at you and say, you're right, and I was wrong, and I'm sorry. It just builds so much trust. It makes such a difference. Then there was the advice that seems okay at first glance, but it really isn't. Melissa Wayne said, give them whatever they want, darling. Give them whatever they want.
She must be a grandparent.
Oh, I love that one. And I love this one from Lucas Avgerinos. He said,
it doesn't matter how you parent, you just have to love your kids.
So if you've been following me for any length of time at all, you'll know that this last one, it just isn't true, and it's pervasive. People really, truly believe that.
I remember that story from Wally, your mentor, about being in the garage with his neighbour, and his son comes screaming into the garage, drops his bike and goes to run off.
He wanted to play with his friend who'd just come home in the neighbourhood.
And the neighbour calls the son back, grabs him by the shirt sleeves and kind of pulls him up into the air and says, put your bike away.
How many times do I have to tell you to put the bike away?
And then as he puts the child down, he kind of looks at Wally, realises that Wally's a parenting expert, and he says, but I love you.
I love you. I love you. And as that kid runs into the garage, do you think he's going, gee, I'm so glad that when I get things wrong, at least I know my dad loves me. It matters how you parent. It actually does. And here's the thing. I've spoken, unfortunately, with so many parents who are simply neglectful, who have even been abusive to their children. Over the years, I've talked to all kinds of parents in all sorts of really challenging situations, and every single one of them will tell me, I love my kids. In fact, I had one mum shout it in my face, I love my kids. I'm a good mother. But I'd just been watching the way she was speaking to her kids, and it was kind of how she was talking to me. And it doesn't matter how much you think you love your kids. What matters is how much your kids know that they're loved. There's a very big difference.
Well, and all the research says that we can say all the words we want, but if our actions aren't congruent with those words, then our actions are going to speak louder every time.
Yeah. So some of you shared, I'm going to say words of wisdom, quote unquote, words of wisdom that at first glance seem really harsh, but you can actually flip them or reframe them. And I like doing this. So Lisbeth Ann Davis said that the worst advice she ever got was kids need to know their place. And at first you kind of go, gee, that's harsh. But then I thought, I reckon there's something in that. Kids do need to know their place. And you know what their place is?
A safe, loving home where they can be seen, heard and valued.
In your arms, feeling like they matter. It's terrible advice, but if you put the right spin on it, it can become really good advice.
Another piece of advice was if you don't force them to be independent, they will always rely on you.
Yeah, so I reckon if we flip this around and think about it, this is probably actually a good place to finish the worst advice ever. This concept that if you don't force them to be independent, they're always going to be relying on you, suggests that by supporting our children, we're making them dependent. But I think if we flip it around, our kids, it's so wonderful when they know that they can always rely on us. We don't want them to be dependent on us, but we do want them to be confident that we as their parent or their caregiver have their back and that we love them no matter what. And the great irony is that when kids know that they can always rely on you, they're less likely to feel the need to. It gives them the courage, though, to explore. And I think that's the crux of it. When I think about how we do Happy Families, right? This business that we've created over the last 15 years. It's got a TV show and a podcast and all the speaking that I do and the books and all the Happy Families membership, the Quest, everything that we do online. That all happened because I could rely on my dad. The story briefly is that in my mid to late 30s, after finishing my PhD, working as a university lecturer, I rang Dad one day and said, I think I want to leave the university setting, stop doing research, stop lecturing, and build a Happy Families business. But I've only got enough cash to get my family through maybe 6 to 9 months. And I don't want to ever have to rely on you, Dad. But if things go badly, if the bottom drops out of this, can we come and live in your garage until we get back on our feet? In other words, I'm trying to do this independently, but if it doesn't work, can I rely on you to just help us to get back on our feet? And Dad didn't hesitate. He said yes.
There's so much power in knowing that somebody believes in you.
Yeah.
And that somebody's willing to step in if things get too hard.
We do what we do now because my dad said yes that day. And we didn't have to rely on him. We had a couple of really close moments where we thought we were going to have to. It's pretty hard to start running a business, especially when you don't know how. But here's the thing. When you look at all of the parenting advice that's bad, the worst parenting advice that we got on that Facebook page, and there were some other really awful ones that we haven't shared because they were just a little bit too awful to talk about. But the reason that so much of that parenting advice is so bad is because it actually tells our kids that they can't rely on us.
Or that they don't matter.
Yeah.
They don't matter. What they want, what they need is not even thought of.
It's that we don't have their back. Like we're putting conditions on the relationship.
It feels so archaic. It's that kind of thing children should be seen but never heard. All of that just feels so dismissive.
Every high-quality book that I've read, every well-researched lecture that I've attended, every study that I've personally written or reviewed, it all tells the same story. The very core of resilience, the very core of a life well lived comes down to the quality of, not just the quality, the security that we feel with the people that we have the closest relationships with. We just live better lives. We live longer lives. We live happier, more productive lives when we know that the important people in our lives have got our back. The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. We hope that this conversation has sparked something for you. If it has, let us know. Podcasts@happyfamilies.com.au. That's podcasts with an S at happyfamilies.com.au. If you'd like more information about getting the best parenting advice, sign up for the waitlist, The Quest, our brand new membership where we hold your hand and walk you through the step-by-step instructions you need to raise your family to flourish. It's all available at happyfamilies.com.au. The waitlist for The Quest is now open.